Okay, this is your first video for Writing 122 Introduction to Business Writing. This video will review Module 5, Designing Documents, Slides, and Screens. And what I hope to do with these videos is really draw your attention to what I think are the most important elements of the module so that you can target your reading. However, don't assume that because it isn't covered in the video, it might not come up in our writing assignments or on a test. You still need to read the modules. However, if you watch the video first, it'll give you an idea of what to focus on and what's less and more important. Another good clue in your textbook are the different terms that you will see that are in bold. So our textbook does a very good job of bolding key terms and definitions of keywords so that you know which terms could appear on an exam or a test. They also do a good job of summarizing everything at the very end in blue or purple at the end of the module. So that's a good place to go for a test or quiz review. For Module 5, I actually am going to start at the end of the chapter on page 85 because this justifies why we're even looking at this module. The question on page 85 and the heading in blue is, when should I think about design? And the answer is right below that in a bullet point in italics. It says, at each stage of the writing process. Later in the week, we're going to talk more about the writing process, but we're starting with the design chapter because we are going to start immediately with some digital texts in this class, like the Google Sites presentation and Module 14 page creation. So this document design is really a key thing to begin with. It's one of the easiest ideas to kind of grab onto that differentiates business writing from school or academic writing or other kinds of writing, because business writing really thinks about design and how that impacts the reader's experience. So I have a slide here that you're looking at, and it shows a reader trying to decipher. He looks very puzzled by this document that he's holding kind of arm's length away from him. And we don't necessarily want to have our readers have that kind of consternation on their faces when they're reading our documents, our business documents. So we want to think about design as we plan our documents, because we have to begin by thinking about our audience's experience. Always, always, for business documents, we're trying to get a job done. We're trying to communicate information quickly and completely to different groups of people. And so we have to always begin thinking about our documents as how they will be experienced by our readers. And that requires some audience analysis. We have to think, as this first bullet point on page 85 says, are our readers skilled readers? Are they busy? Will they read the document straight through, or are they going to be looking around? Is it an instruction manual that they need to be able to just flip to the precise page that they will need at that moment instead of reading from front to back like you would a book? And so this recommends that as we write, then we begin to think about how to incorporate lists and headings, that's bullet number 2, and using visuals. And this I will get to later has to do with at the very beginning, we even begin to think about the order of information, how we group information in business documents from the start. And that all links back to this all-important reader. How are they going to be reading the document? How are they going to experience it? So my bullet points here are, can they quickly find information, right? Are they able to skim or scan to what they need to find? And then how does their eye move across the page? And that will get us to the key items in this module, which you'll find on page 78. They offer 5 guidelines, which I've actually modified a little. And so these are my 5. There are 5. They talk about using white space, using headings, limiting the uses of words in all caps, and I'll talk about that as well. But I've grouped that under fonts. And then so their next bullet point says use no more than 2 fonts in a single document, also under fonts number 3 for me. And then they talk about deciding whether to justify margins based on the situation in the audience. And so I too believe that margins and choosing indentation is an important feature. But my fifth one goes back to that idea about bulleted lists and things like that, and how to organize the information. I think the key underlying rationale here is grouping. How do we group information? And all of the things, font choices, headings, margins, white space, that's all going to help the reader's eye to group information in particular ways. So in order to demonstrate this, I'm actually going to show you a really bad document here. This is, I've messed this up. This is an assignment for an academic writing class that I've taught in the past. And you can see here that if we are just looking at this in terms of design, this is a really impossible document to read. We don't know where the title is. The font is all like, is really small. All the words are all crammed together at the top of the page. And so it's hard for us as a reader to break into this. It's like a solid wall of text, and it's not reader friendly. It's not asking us to find information. If I were to ask you right now, what is the format required for this assignment, and this was your assignment sheet, it would be really hard to skim down and find that there is actually a place where there is, you know, some information about formatting. And so even just changing the font color there, you can see how our eye begins to say, oh, there is format, and there's a colon after that. That shows us that there's a, you know, a subset of information there. So we're going to use this document to talk about, first of all, white space, that big number one, right? Going back here, white space. Why is white space important? It keeps the reader from feeling like they're being overwhelmed by a wall of text, and it helps their eye to better group information and separate information. And so one of the first easiest ways to create white space is to just go ahead and use standard business margins. Standard business margins are usually under Word under normal. We usually have 1 inch on all sides. Okay, so first of all, now white space is this area around the text that's now appeared, and it starts to better group and make the text feel contained so that we're able to maybe begin to separate out in different kinds of information. So that's the first set of white space. Often business documents will have specialized letterhead that they're printed on, and so if that's the case, then a document might actually have, you might use custom margins, and a standard letterhead usually then has a top margin of either 1.5 or 2 inches, okay? But if there's no letterhead, it's just 1 inch on all sides. That's standard business margins. Okay, so now our textbook on page 78 talks about other ways to create more white space, and then they also incorporate this idea of headings into this as well, right? So white space will help us draw attention to certain things. Even just going so far as to separate the different sections here with a little bit of space in between them, we now are able to see that there are some separate sections here. Our eye is better able to chunk some different sections of information, okay? And so now this doesn't look like one big wall of text, although it's still a little intimidating, but it looks like, oh yeah, okay, so when, what, formatting, how, what we're doing, why, okay. Now we see that we have a title. So just that creation of white space begins to help us see the document more clearly. One of the key things that I will drive home this in this class is that when it comes to the rest of document design, there are a few key things that we just know about the way these people's eyes track on the page and things like that. But then it all becomes a matter of choices, whether you use bold or italics to emphasize things, whether you use a certain kind of font or another. What the name of the game then becomes this: consistency. Consistency is the biggest thing. Whatever you choose, stick with it. Okay, so once you've made a decision that all of your headings are going to look like X, or that you know, you are going to always double space between your headings, in any case, whatever you choose, you just want to be consistent. Okay, so consistency is the name of the game. Okay, try not to make this too much longer. So in terms of fonts then, I'm going to move on to fonts and headings here and talk about both of these together. One of the key things you can see here, one of the biggest issues that we have is that this font's really small. Anything below, a 12 starts to get pretty hard to read. 11-point or 12-point fonts are pretty standard sizes. You don't want to get much smaller than that. One thing you can do in terms of titles and headings then is to make those larger than the rest of your document so that those stand out. So font size helps us to create emphasis. Now, I'm going to actually create these as headings. A heading is basically like a subtitle or title that sits above a section and tells the reader that like what is happening in that section. So you'll notice here that headings that have white space above them stand out more. It's easier to see them. And so again, putting at least one space above your headings or even two is appropriate. And having more space above the heading than below helps draw our attention to that heading, okay? So when I eliminate this white space below the headings, you can see that we're able to see the heading and then what follows very easily. Now I could also make these headings slightly larger than the rest of the text. That would be an option. So font size becomes important. Now notice again, going back to consistency, once you do it on one, you need to do it on every single one all the way down. Notice here too that these headings all have colons, which is these two dots after the word at the end of them. Again, if it's going to be on one, then it needs to be on all of these. Here you can see how this paragraph is actually a part of the section above it. And so what I've done is just left a single space here, whereas I know that these are section headings because there's two spaces here. So again, using the white space to group information for our readers. Now, some other features. We could do something like underline this title. We could then use bold to make the heading stand out even further. Already we're better able to read this document. A student who was under a deadline and desperately searching for the format section would now be able to skim this document without having to read the whole thing and just skip straight to format. Okay, so you can see how creating headings and using specific headings helps the reader to separate, group, and identify and find quickly the information that they need. Okay. A couple of more things then, just about margins and indentation. Okay. Notice that all of this text here is left aligned. You can also create white space by indenting. So you could do something like this where you move the information over to the center of the page. We're creating more white space here. This again helps the reader to group information differently. It's helping the headings to stand out. So this is like one option here. Okay, this would be something that you could do. If you had multiple things like this, please type this essay in standard MLA format, double space, Times New Roman. So you can see here, we could also create a list or a bullet pointed list within this to better identify each of these features for our readers. So again, just assisting them with finding the information they need quickly and without having to search for it. They just can, their eyes can just scan right to it. So here, that really, now this section looks so much, is so much easier to read than the initial one. Again, I'm going to actually just save this as a revision and reopen that other document and remind you of what we were dealing with before. This document, all the same text. I have not changed any of the information, just the page design, just the formatting, basically, to help readers better find information. Okay. A few other things to be aware of with fonts and headings. Okay, so going back up here, we've talked a little bit about margins, some indentation. With indentation, you're going to just, again, want to be consistent, and I'll talk some more about that when we do some specific memo and letter formatting. But in terms of fonts, I really just want to draw your attention then to a couple of things that we know about fonts, okay? The book talks about this, okay? So how caps, actually all caps, makes the shape of this sentence one big box. So our eyes cannot separate the words as easily or read as quickly. Whereas when you don't have all caps, then these words actually have little shapes that our eyes use to better identify and quickly read each word, okay? So you want to limit the amount of all caps that you use. Now, that's not to say that caps doesn't help things like headings, which are short, to stand out, right? This is also one way that you could do this. But the point is, you wouldn't want to write the entire document in all caps, because that's going to slow the reader's ability to actually read that. That text looks much harder to read, much less friendly. Again, now we're getting back to that block format where we just feel like there's a wall thrown at us, versus sentence level capitalization, which allows our eyes to feel like, okay, I can differentiate different words and read much more quickly. Okay, the other thing to be aware of is that fonts come in two types. Page 81 of our book shows you some different fonts, okay? The biggest difference to notice is that the difference is between what are called serifs, which you can see on this sentence here, these little flags that are right like this little bit off the F, versus this F, right, which doesn't have any flags, this little bit off the H, versus this H, which just ends straight up and down. Okay, this little serif flag on the top of that L, look at this L, just straight up and down. Okay, these little flags are called serifs. So serifs fonts are actually designed to help the eye track across and read more quickly. And so for text, like these here, these paragraphs, a serif font would actually be more friendly. So Times New Roman is the most standard serif font, okay? Now, on the other hand, Arial font, which is what this is here, draws attention. So sans, and this word sans means without flags, sans serif fonts like Arial draw attention to text. So that you can see here, like, boom, Arial text, our eyes pop right to this. But then it's easier for our eyes to read a line of text that has serifs or flags. So Times New Roman is a good text font, okay? And Arial is a good heading font. So I'll just add that here. Times New Roman is really good for text. And I'll put this in Times New Roman so that we can see. And then okay, and then Arial is good for headings. Okay. A few other things to take note of that will be important when you're using the design module for Google Sites. On pages 82 and 83, it talks specifically about designing presentation slides and web pages. The key thing that I really want to draw your attention to here is are the bullet points on page 83, which talk about previewing information, okay? So I'll give you some lists here, actually. Previewing information. And then including key information first, okay? And this is actually going to be true of most business documents. In the opening paragraphs, now what this is specifically talking about is how, for instance, if we go to a page like City College's homepage, that any detailed information should be separated onto internal pages, right? So I should get more information about specifics the further I go into the site. But notice that we don't really pay much attention to what's at the bottom of a page. So that's also a place where we could get more specific as we go down. However, on a web page, you want the key information like your titles, any links to other things, anything that's really big should be first. And so that's that idea that we should preview early and include key information first and then get more specific, okay, as you go down or further into the site. Okay. And then in terms of slides, this isn't the greatest slide to show as an example, but notice that I'm trying to follow these design features where we use big titles or big font for titles, and then you know, try to use bullet points and only have 3 to 5 points per document slide. We don't want to overdo the number of pieces of information on each slide, and that's probably really true of web pages as well. Okay. Now, going back to our big 5, just to review, remember that our biggest test about any of this has to do with the reader's experience. Can they quickly find info? How does their eye move across the page? White space helps, headings help, okay? Group information. Fonts, it's really important to think about how our eye sees and reads different kinds of fonts. Going back to this, you don't want to use any more than 2 fonts per page, okay, or per document, really. So that is really key. And so that usually you'll choose some kind of sans serif font for your headings and some kind of serif font for your text, and that will be it. Those are all the more font that you will have within a business document, okay? And then margins and indentation, again, 1 inch on all sides. Be consistent with indentation. We'll talk more about that specifically with memos and letters. And then group information, okay? Be consistent always with your headings. Try really hard to separate information into sections that the reader can just skim and find. Use lists, either bullets or numbers, and we'll talk more about that later as well. And then try to avoid widows and orphans. And I'm just going to scan down here. You can see that this poor little heading ended up on the bottom. That's actually fine. What you don't want to see is a single line that's separated from the rest of its text, okay? So you'd want to, or for instance, a heading that's separated from the rest of its text. In that case, you'd want to just force that section onto the next page so that all of the information is together. Okay, so widows and orphans are when a line gets separated or a heading gets separated from the rest of its information. You want to have at least 2 lines together. Okay, this one's okay because the entire section is here. And so that is Module 5. Let's just go back really quick. Here are your key points: white space, headings, fonts, margins and indentation, grouping of information, and overall consistency.